All right, welcome to the Busy Moms Book Club. Today, we are doing a book that I was just telling everybody here on the book club that I feel like my soul sister wrote. I feel like everything that she spoke in this book is exactly what I love to talk about and what I teach a lot to my clients, which is really fun to see somebody else in the world putting out the same amazing ideas. So the book that we are doing today is The Lazy Genius Way by Kendra Adachi. And I did put on the board, I know some of you will be listening to the audio of this. If you are watching this on YouTube, I did put my podcast over here. So the Mom on Purpose podcast, you can find it on any podcasting platform. I do talk about a lot of these same concepts on my podcast. So, going back to Elizabeth Gilbert's book on Big Magic on how ideas can inhabit multiple people at the same time, I really feel like that's kind of what this book was a lot of the same ideas that I've seen work in my own home and that I've created. They're really happening in this place. So just a brief introduction to me. I'm Laura Johnson. I'm a certified life coach. I help moms stop living reactively and start living on purpose. And as part of that, it's finding our purpose. And once we really know what our purpose is, then we go to working to achieve that. And one of the critical things that I have seen in working with my clients is that when we start achieving our purpose, we get that fire and that passion and we go all in. And suddenly the systems within our home starts to fall apart to the point where within a couple years, which is usually the timeline that I see in other people and in groups that I'm in, is by about year 2 or 3, you will give up on your purpose if you haven't built out the systems within your home and within your family. And the reason for that is because when you go all in on these things, it feels good. It doesn't always feel good to do laundry or to do dishes. And so what happens is that if you don't have those systems built out, those systems, like they already exist, but they're not working effectively for you and they start to fail to the point where you'll start to give up on whatever that purpose is. And so that's what I really loved about this book and why I always try and find books that help us with that same mission of like living our purpose and living on purpose. That's why this book in my mind was really important for us to read and to learn about, was because this sets the foundation for us to achieve whatever it is that God is calling us to do. And so we always start with a game. On, this book club is for you. This book is for you. Is if you always have a list of shoulds, like you should be exercising more, you should have a better morning routine, you should be going to bed earlier, you should be doing this with your kids. So if that's something that really happens with you, if you have that list of shoulds, you're in the right place. Also, if you really wear a badge of honor with like your busyness, meaning like your life is really messy, you have a lot going on. And when you can't respond to a text right away, when you do respond, you say, I'm so sorry, I couldn't get to this. I had X, Y, and Z. Okay. And you list out all the things on why you were so busy. So that's another, you're in the right place. Another one is if you have the mentality of go big or go home, anytime you are working towards a goal, meaning if you are wanting to exercise, you learn a whole new exercise program. Or if you're wanting to have a healthier lifestyle, you throw away everything in your pantry. Okay, so it's like an all in, you're going to go all the way whenever you do that. Also, is if you find yourself fighting with your reality a lot, maybe your kids aren't behaving in the way that you want them to, or maybe they're at a phase that really makes it difficult for you to move forward. Maybe you're frustrated because you don't have a partner that helps you as much as you would like them to. All of these things, if you get really frustrated and resentful and you start fighting with these realities. And then the last thing you'll know this book club is for you is if you find that you really relish being an independent person and that you're very self-sufficient to the point where you don't actually let other people into your life and you find yourself feeling really lonely, and that you really crave having some deep connections with other people. Now, I know this seems like a big spectrum of things, and that's what I really love about this book is she teaches us overarching principles in order for us to move forward in these different areas of our life. And so when I'm reading this book, And what I really loved about it, like I mentioned before, is that I believe that what she teaches and what, I have felt on my own is God teaching us a different way to live. And so in the introduction, she talks about that. She says, the reason why you're tired, and I'd say every one of my clients, they've always gotten on the phone with me and they will all talk about like a different level of exhaustion, an exhaustion that doesn't go away by a good night's sleep. And so she starts the book with that, talking about the real reason why you're tired. And I wanted to start, the introduction to this. She says, you are quote unquote on all the time, trying to be present with your people, managing the emotions of everyone around you, carrying the invisible needs of strangers in line at the post office, and figuring out how to meet your own needs with whatever you have left over, assuming you know what your needs are in the first place. She says it's too much, or maybe it feels like too much because you haven't read the right book, listened to the right podcast, or found the right system. She said, I know that feeling. I've spent an embarrassing number of hours searching for the right tools to make life feel under control. She said, unnecessary spoiler alert, they didn't help. And so that's what I really thought was interesting, was because in the beginning, you're thinking, okay, this book is going to solve everything. This podcast, the Mom on Purpose podcast, is going to solve everything. Like if I just follow this regimented plan, it's going to fix things. And so that's what I thought was really interesting, that she started the book saying like, this step by step isn't going to change things for you. But what I do like that she continues on and she outlines for us, she says, the right comment, she said, She said, really, I just stayed tired doing all of those things. She said, I have good news. You don't need a new list of things to do. You need a new way to see. So when we're looking at this book, the Lazy Genius Way, the whole purpose is not to have a prescription or, like a step-by-step checklist, like as soon as you do these things, your life will be better. The whole purpose of it is to learn how to think differently. And I love that because that's exactly what I teach my clients. Like, I can't tell you what is going to be the perfect solution for your family because you are the expert of your family. You just haven't learned to think about you as the expert yet. And so when she's talking about, what she's talking about this book is learning how to look from a different perspective, from a different lens, to put on a new way of seeing the world that you exist in. And so as I'll mention all these steps in we'll go through each of these steps in just a second. But what she says within each of these steps, and you'll notice each chapter is a new step. She has 13 principles or steps that we'll go through. The whole overarching theme here is to live in the lazy genius way. So let's start out with, what is a lazy genius? She said a genius is getting super clear about the things that matter. Okay. And then being a lazy person is not caring about the things that don't matter. Things that don't matter. Okay. And then she says, ... to you. Now, there will be times where that there will be something that is important to someone else that because, Dawn, you are just fine if your camera is off. So don't worry. We always have a good mix of cameras on or cameras off. So when we are being lazy about something, sometimes we think, okay, well, if it's important to someone else, then it also has to be important to me. And if I'm not having it be important to me, then I must be lazy. We create this like weird mentality, but none of us want to admit that we're lazy. Like, that doesn't sound good because of what we make lazy mean. I love that the lazy genius way is giving us permission to be lazy on certain things because they don't matter to us, and that's okay. And then being a genius are really getting clear on what are the things that do matter to us. Let's go all in on those. And so she even says that in the book. She says the problem with perfection and the problem that most of us run into is that we think we should care about everything at this high level. And when we try and care about everything, we do nothing well. And that's really what happens because you only have a certain capacity. So if everything matters and you're trying to do everything to the very best of your ability, you're only going to do a few things well. Like for the most part, you won't do any of it well. So then you'll swing so far to that side where like you're trying so hard and nothing's working to the point where your body starts to shut down. And then you swing so far, the pendulum swings so far the other way to where you just give up on it, where you're like, okay, well, it's not working. So why bother at all? And so what she's teaching us in this book and what she's inviting us to think differently about is that both of these things can coexist. And when they start to coexist, we start to create shortcuts in our life and allow it to be this like creative aspect within us so that we can create a lot of order. Now, what I really appreciate that she also says in the introduction, before we get into the 13 principles and steps that she outlines for us, is I really like that she says that there is some kind of mentality that exists, that if somebody seems put together and to have a good life, we immediately start to judge them. On the flip side is if somebody is showing their chaos that exists within their house, then it's okay to applaud them. And I really love what she said. She said, we can be real and have like real as in a human being, an imperfect human being, when our life is in order and when it falls apart. And we don't just have to put chaos as our gauge for vulnerability. It can be just as vulnerable to have our home and life in order. And I appreciated that she said that because I find myself in that realm a lot, in social media and putting my home and life and the things that I teach out there in the world is that I never want to appear, quote unquote, too perfect. Like I want people to be relatable to me. But in reality, my life is really good because I've created that. And because I'm very intentional about that. For the most part, yeah, there are times where my house is a mess, but for the most part, my systems run really well. And I find that I don't put that side of things out as much as I do some of the other things. And so that was a really good invitation, I think, for all of us, is that we can really embrace our joy. And that can be real. That can be our real, authentic version of ourselves. And she invites us to allow ourselves to stop judging other people for doing the same thing, because we all get stuck in that comparison trap. And then the other thing before we go into the steps that I would just mention is that really look at the lazy genius way. Remember, we're learning how to think differently. Look at it as a creative outlet for you. This was like a really big shift for me. When I was trying to keep my house clean, when I was trying to get my kids to behave in a certain way, all of those shoulds that I had, my brain was really frustrated because you can't always control the state of your home. You can't always control the way your children are going to behave, as much as I have tried. But in the end, what it really boils down to is I was solving for the wrong problems. And then I was asking myself, well, what's wrong with me? I can't figure this out. So of course my brain answered that. It told me all the things that was wrong with me. Instead of thinking, okay, this is a creative outlet. What are the things that matter to me? Okay, now I can go to work on that. What are the things that I don't care about? Okay, now I can go to work on that. And so I really got my brain going and thinking in a different way. And it became such an awesome, such a beautiful creative outlet for me within my home, where I was looking at the rhythms and the strategies and the systems, all that existed there, instead of like this very structured, you have to do it this one certain way because this is what I was told in some book somewhere kind of thing. Okay, so this is this principle, the lazy genius way. I mean, I guess that's flopped, but that's what we are going to be applying to all of the 13 principles that she outlines in the book. Now, what I like about these 13 principles is that yes, they build on each other, and yes, they stand alone. So if you are going to read this book, and as we're going through these 13 principles, if one of them doesn't resonate with you, or it doesn't seem really useful right now, you can totally skip it and find one that does, and work on that one principle. So there's no right way to go through these, and she's very specific in that book, and there is no right way to apply it. You get to find and discover how you are the expert within your own home, and then go to work on that. So the first principle, she says, is to decide once. Okay. She said that good fixed decisions add value to our life. Well, and I will also say, those that are on, might steal her idea of having a Monday uniform. I love that. Yes, that is one nice thing. I'm reading a comment over in the chat box from Ansi. She does talk about having like a set, like she called it her uniform, for deciding once on what she was going to wear on Mondays. That is one nice thing about being pregnant, is my wardrobe is significantly smaller. And especially with it being summer, it's like a dress. That's all I have. It's like, do I want this dress or this dress? Really so much easier. So she talks about how once you make a decision, you stay with that decision. That's it. So simple. And I have found how challenging that can be for so many of us, and why I teach like the decision-making cycle. You can go to my podcast and find that, where I talk about the decision-making cycle, because we want to question our decisions. Just don't. Like, put yourself on like a lifestyle diet where you're just going to trust the first decision that you make, and you're going to stick with it. And recognize that when you want to change it, it's because there's some kind of emotion you're trying to avoid. That's okay. It's okay to feel any vibration. It's okay to feel any emotion. It's going to come. But when you decide once on something, then suddenly you're giving yourself permission to just go forward on that. And so what I love that she says, constant decision-making is one of the reasons you don't have energy for things that matter to you. By discovering a few opportunities to decide once and then never again, you give your brain room to play. Oh, doesn't that sound amazing? And I found that like the second I stopped questioning my decisions, I literally gave back hours of my life to me. Like I was the only one, like nobody else knew what was happening in my brain, but it was like this energy and time suck, thinking over and over about the same things. When in reality, once I decided on something and just moved forward with it, my brain, it was like freedom that started to exist. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, and again, there's 13, so we'll move through these pretty quick. She says, start small. Now, this always sounds really great to me in theory. And my brain always throws a fit every time because I don't think it's good enough. But really recognize that what she says in this chapter is that sustainable steps keep us moving forward. So she has a really great example in this where she was wanting to learn yoga. And she couldn't, like, it was just too much for her to like learn yoga. Like she got too overwhelmed. So for her to start small, all she did every single day, I think she said for 6 months, was she would do downward dog, just one yoga position. That was it. She did it. She's like, and I didn't become a yoga master overnight. She's like, I was just doing one downward dog, but suddenly it was sustainable. She could keep doing it every single day. She was building her momentum. And I think about this, with goals, and what I teach my clients is I always tell them like Newton's law of motion, like an object in motion stays in motion. The whole purpose of this is to get you in motion. Once you are in motion, you will stay in motion. And that's what she really talks about in here. She says, we keep waiting for things in our lives to change, but then there's always something else that comes up. she said, okay, well, maybe it hasn't worked yet because we haven't found the right system, meaning we have to keep revamping and revamping and revamping. Again, it goes back to the decide once, like decide once to do something a certain way and then start small. It's not the system that's going to make it. It's whether or not you are doing an activity that's sustainable going forward. So that's what you always want to be doing and looking for are the small and simple things, okay, so that you can move forward. So the next thing that she talks about, let me flip it, is to ask the magic question. Ask the magic question. Again, like I love this because I do the same thing, which is so fun to see. So she talks about asking the magic question. She says, what can I, and this is what it is. What can I do now that will make my life easier? It's that simple. What can I do now that will make my life easier? Now I have a small little twist on it. For me, what my magic question is, what can I do now that I'll thank myself for later? And I love this because instead of like keeping yourself again to this like rigid structure, what you're doing is just inviting creative thinking. You're looking for new ways to see the world instead of, oh, at this time I have to do this thing and this thing and this thing. Like my brain just doesn't work like that. It feels like somebody is putting me in a box. And as soon as I feel like I'm put in a box, I get really mad. So for me, this is very open-ended. Like, what can I do that I'll thank myself for later? And so I started looking at this like before. So she has a couple different case studies that I love. And one of the things for me that's really challenging because I just don't enjoy it is cooking dinner. If you would have told me, as a teenager that you'll be cooking dinner for little people for the rest of your life, I would have died, I think. I just don't enjoy cooking. I never have. And I have a beautiful daughter that thoroughly enjoys cooking. And so I've really struggled with this. Like, this is a very difficult aspect of motherhood and adulting for me is I probably just wouldn't feed myself. I would just eat snacks all day long. And so when I think about this, like ask the magic question, what I realized was that every time I sat down to figure out dinner, I would do what my mom does. And she would write down a schedule of what we're going to make. And then she'd go look at all the fun different recipes. Like she was always changing things up, which is amazing. Like I told her that this last Sunday, I'm like, I love that you're always trying new things and new recipes. That doesn't jive with me. So for me, like, what's the one thing that I'll thank myself for later is it's having like 3 meals that I make a week. That's it. Like I only make about 3 meals a week where I'm actually cooking, because in my brain, I thought, okay, I can thank myself for 3 meals. That gives me a day for leftovers. That gives me a day for lunch. And then we always have pizza on Friday nights because by that point, I'm just tired. And you can find, we have a place where you can pick up a pizza and cook it at home. It's called Papa Murphy's, and you can find sales. So the pizza's only like $6. And so for me, that's really what I started to thank myself for. Another example of this is I really thanked myself for, I just refound this actually. After Christmas this last year, I was so overwhelmed by all of the things that I felt like we forgot that, we still addressed, but I felt like we were being more reactive to it. And so after Christmas, I wrote down an entire list of everything that we would need to consider, from stocking stuff to who's making breakfast, who's making Christmas Eve dinner, who's buying this, or, whatever it was. It was like all the things that we would need to think about. And I have no recollection of doing this, honestly, but I did it. And because at the time, I'm sure I asked myself the magic question, what will I think? What can I do right now that I'll thank myself for later? And I did. I pulled it up and I found it in my Google Drive, and I pulled up the thing and I'm like, wow, I am so glad that I did this. Thank you for past self, for doing this. And so it became such a fun game, again, a creative outlet for me to start thinking about that. Okay, so I want you just to always be looking at, what can I do right now last, very small example before the next principle is I remember when, again, going back to dinner, when I had the thought on like, oh, I've got like this awkward hour in between coaching calls. What should I do? And I was like, oh, I could cut vegetables up for dinner for what the meal I'm cooking. And it blew my mind to think I could cut vegetables in the morning. Like it seems so simple, but I was so thankful for it. And it did make my life so much easier. So ask the magic question. Number 4, live in the season. Now, I talk a lot about this with my clients because I have clients in full ranges of seasons. And I will mention, as we're going through these, if one really stands out to you or sparks some kind of creative idea in your mind, please, go over to the chat box and share that with us. We would love to hear, maybe what's something that you can start small on or something that would make your life easier. You can go over to the chat box and share that with us. I'd love to see those. So I have clients that range, with their kids that are grown, married, college, all the way down to pregnancy and toddlerhood and all of that. Like I have a full range of mothers that I coach. And so many of them are in such different seasons, and living in these different seasons, every season has its challenges. And what I appreciate that she spoke about in this is that we have something to learn in every season of our life. And what I found is that for a long time, I was fighting with the season that I was in, that I was up in the middle of the night and I was tired all of the time, or that my kids, I was trying to keep up with their schedules, where my kids are getting to the age where we have a lot more activities in the evening. And now the season is changing where I might need to change dinner routines or, whatever that is. So what she talks about in here is that we don't have to fight with the season that we're in. We can express our frustrations about it and really get clear that it may not be easy, and we can start to embrace it and learn something from every season that we're in. And so she also talks about in this section, okay, here's what I wanted to read to you. She said, being a lazy genius doesn't mean loving every season. It means welcoming each one kindly and letting it teach you something. And I think that's just a really beautiful way of thinking about it, that it's okay if you don't love the season that you're in, but you can start living it on purpose and learning something. And so she talks about learning the rhythms of each season. And she actually goes through the different seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, and she outlines something that she recognizes in that season. And so for winter, for example, she breaks it down into 2 separate seasons where it's like the excitement of the holidays and it's the boring nothingness of the second half. And I'm like, how true is that? Like after the holidays, there's just like this stretch where you're just trying to like make it through. We call it the gray winter. There's like the exciting winter and the gray winter, where we get a lot of extra fog and pollution that kind of gets stuck in our air here. Everything kind of has like a gray tone. And so what I've learned in those seasons, at least for me, is that I used to fight the gray. But what I found was that I could create whatever I wanted in my own life. I could feel whatever I wanted. So as soon as the gray comes, you'll notice I'm in spring colors. Like those are the times where I wear the brightest colors, because it just makes me feel different. And I just enjoy being that bright color in the middle of the gray for myself. And so I really, and this is where I would challenge each of you, is to start recognizing the rhythms that you naturally have, the rhythms of your family in every season, meaning season of life and actual physical seasons that we're living in. Because you'll start to find that you have something beautiful to learn in every season. All right, so the next principle, that was a ugly 5, build the right routines. You see that? Okay, we'll erase it after this one. Build the right routines. So she talks about in this one, she says, get very clear on what matters today. Again, thinking about it in the genius way. And oops, oh, I'm already on the page. And she said, really get clear that a routine is not to bring in more control in your life. She says a routine, so let me actually just read this. It's going to make more sense. She said, there comes a point when grasping for control makes you feel tired instead of safe. And so a lot of people will start to build routines out in a way to control their day. And in an effort to control and fit it into this perfect little box where everything will work together for your good, it's actually really exhausting. And so when you step back, outside of that control and start creating the right routines, those are just on ramps for the next part or the transition that you're going into. It gives a lot of flexibility and a lot of grace to allow life and the challenges it presents to just happen on their own. And so she says the gift of routine is offering just a soft place for us to land. And so it's important for us to recognize that we always go very slowly through routines. She said she has a bunch of steps to outline. She said, always start small. Again, going back to principle 2. She says, make your first step stand alone, which means she says, explore where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck in that routine. And then 3, remember where you're going. And so for me, as I thought about this for myself, let me actually read this. She said, the point isn't to have the same detailed routine every day you work. Instead, ask yourself what matters to your work today. Start small with the one thing and then go and do it. That's your routine. And so when I started thinking about this for myself, I used to get really frustrated that I didn't have a great morning routine. Great meaning I wasn't doing it in the way I thought I should do it. But what I realized for me was that waking up and then shaming myself for not waking up earlier wasn't very effective, as you can imagine. And so what I started recognizing was, how can I build the right routine? And so what I started doing on my phone was, for me, the really small thing, the thing that gave me the biggest bang for my buck was, one, I was no longer allowed to shame myself when I woke up. That was just off the table. Like whenever I woke up was the right time to wake up. And then the second thing was I created on my phone, I have an Apple phone, you go to the very top, and I silence my phone from the hours of, I think it's like 10:30 to 7:25. At 7:25, my alarm will always go off. Now, there are times that I do wake up earlier than that, but I still keep that on. It's part of it's like my on-ramp for the day, where this beautiful music comes on and then it tells me the weather. I love it. It sounds so simple, but it's such a fun way for me to start my morning. Is I think, this is such a nice, beautiful sound, and I'm preparing for the day as I think about the weather. And I said, I wear the same things. It's not like I'm changing my wardrobe, but it was just like a fun way to start that routine. It was just the on-ramp. Okay. And so really think about that for yourself as you're thinking about your routines. Look at what doesn't seem to be working or where you're losing yourself or a lot of frustration is happening. And think about, how can I start small? How can I do something that really just honors the natural rhythm of my body? For me, the natural rhythm is to wake up in a very peaceful way. Like that's what my body wants, not to hit the ground running. And so even before, my kids wake up or anything, I have that beautiful sound that goes off. Okay. So that's where you want to start building the right routines and thinking about it in very small ways and then going about it. So the next one, number 6, she says to set house rules. And I like that in this one, again, she mentions this multiple times in the book, that one person's house rules may not work for another person. And I appreciated that. And she said, you're always looking for the first domino that will trigger the other ones. Again, same thing with the routines, you're just building an on-ramp. And that she always keeps her purpose of the house rules as connection first. And as I thought about it, and as she goes through and she outlines some of her house rules, they're very different than my house rules, which is kind of fun to look at how other people exist. So she said, no house rule fits every house. She said, what works for me won't necessarily work for you. And then she goes and she talks about how she started noticing patterns or rhythms within her home and thinking creatively about what's the first domino. So for me, one of the things that she mentions is like with her closet. She has a house rule that you don't buy clothes that someone else says that she should buy. Because what she found was that she just didn't love it and she felt like she should love it, but she didn't really. And so as I was thinking about that, like, what is the house rule for me? And one of the things that I realized is I no longer shop sales, because what I found was that I would buy something on sale because it was on sale, not because I actually loved it. And then I would have a whole closet full of clothes that I didn't actually love or wanted to wear very often. And it started to like really clutter and make a big mess. And it was not a joyful experience. For me, I stopped shopping sales. Like I just don't shop sales unless it's something I'm already going to purchase and it just happens to be on sale. I spend less money, honestly. Like I was very surprised when I really started watching it, because I'm not buying, $10 5 things. I might buy one thing that's $50 and I actually love it and I love to wear it. And I'm really not a big shopper anyway. So the other one that she talks about, and again, you're just going to start noticing the patterns. Like for dinner, I know the second my kids get up, I'm going to have to walk around and start collecting all of the dishes. So the house rule became, as soon as you stand up from dinner, plates go to the sink. Even my 4-year-old does it. As soon as they start leaving the room, I'm like, hey, I think you forgot something. They're like, oh yeah, I gotta move, I gotta clear my plate. So they clear their plate. So that's just a house rule, is everybody clears their plates. And the other one I thought was really interesting was that she has a rule of no phones at the table. And she had a different rule for reading. Now, I have a lot of neurodivergence. That's what we call each other in the house. We've got a lot of neurodivergence within the house. So many of them cannot sit. They're literally moving all around the room. Well, they'll come and take a bite and move. I have also found that having something to read on a phone or on a book, depending on if it's my spouse or if it's my child, helps them have an enjoyable dinner experience. So for us, the house rule isn't necessarily like dinner is not necessarily a time of connection. The time after dinner when we're all physically playing is. And so get really clear on what your house rules are based on the natural rhythms of your family. So number 7, let me set this down. Number 7 is put everything in its place. Everything. Okay, so this kind of goes along in my mind with, at least for me, with number 6, where I found that if I brought something into my home, I couldn't bring it into my home until I was okay to address it and put it into its place. So an example of this is my son loves to get the mail, and I so appreciate him getting the mail. It goes in one spot. Now, I will not touch the mail until I can open and address whatever is in the envelope. Most of it's junk, but if I'm in a position where I've got stuff on the stove, I'm not going to go through the mail because I'm not in a spot where I can really make that decision once over whether or not to keep it. And so when I think about putting everything in its place, I get really clear on where do things go and when I have time to put them there, and making sure I'm not addressing it, or making sure I have time to address it when it comes into the house. So examples, summer's a really busy time. I don't bring the bag in of all of our stuff until I have a 5-minute window to put all the towels in the laundry, to put sunscreen where it goes, all of that. Same thing with vacations. For the most part, we stay at Airbnbs now, not always, but a lot of times we do. And so I wash all of the laundry before we leave. That's one of the benefits of an Airbnb. And so as soon as we come home, everybody puts all their laundry away. It's like the best thing. that was life-changing for me when we all came back with clean clothes from vacation. It was so great. And so that's one of the things, like as soon as we come in, suitcases get put away. And it's kind of a joke that we have, is that if things don't get put away from vacation, within the first 5 minutes, it will be put away in the next month. So it's like this all or nothing that exists in our house. And so I've just learned, like, we just put everything away in its place as soon as we bring it in from the house. Number 8, and I love that she includes this in the lazy genius way, because it's not just about the home structures that exist. It's not about systems and routines only. It's also about relationships, and that you can look at things from the lazy genius way, even in our relationships. And so she talks about, she has a quote. Actually, I'm not sure if I marked this quote. Maybe I did. She said, "You can't live well without connection and community." She said, "When we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known, and when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection." She said that's where, that's how she defines love. That's Brene Brown's quote on love, where we really allow ourselves to be seen and be vulnerable with other people. Now, I learned this lesson a long time ago in my church community, where they called it the law of proximity. And the law of proximity is that when you enter someone else's personal space, like their home, it becomes a very vulnerable experience. And within this vulnerability, there's a deeper level of love and connection that happens. And so what she invites us to do is to allow people into our home, allow them to enter our proximity, because it's vulnerable for us. And to the second you invite someone in your home, that connection is already built out. I really like that she also said is that we don't have to be in crisis in order to ask for help. This has been a really challenging thing for me to learn, because by nature, I'm a very guarded person. I'm a very introverted person. And so for me to let my wall down and to allow people to come into my home is a very vulnerable experience. And I will be seen how I am. I've really done a lot of work that, I don't have to, have that perfect look in order for somebody to come into my home. And as I've done that, I've created a much deeper community and connections with people that really matter to me. And I'm so grateful for that. And so I really want to give you that challenge, is that as part of the lazy genius way, that you are letting people in. All right, number 9, she says, batch it. She says the whole reason why we batch it, which means we take things and we do them kind of in clumps. She said, the reason why you do that is you turn things on autopilot. And so I was thinking about, how do I batch things? For me, one of the ways I batch is, again, everybody brings dishes to this kitchen sink. That's a way to batch things. All at once, I know what's happening with dishes. And then I can go on to autopilot, where I know very specifically, I'm sure you guys do this too, where things go in the dishwasher. I have had to let go of control as I've teach my kids, and my husband joins in on the dishes, where I'm not controlling the way that they're doing dishes. But for me, the autopilot is I always have a spot where all my cups go, all my bowls go, all of my plates go, all of that. Okay, so for me, that's just an easy way to turn my brain on autopilot and start thinking creatively about other things. Laundry is another one, where I only do laundry once a week, and it's amazing. And if I don't get it all done in that day, then it sits until the following week. Most of the time, it's like clean clothes in a basket in people's rooms. Now, for the most part, people, I say people, my kids, that's who the people are. They're pretty good, but like we've been in transition right now, going back to school. And so clothes didn't get put away this week. And so, clean clothes come from their basket. But that's one way that I also batch it, is I never have to think about it any other time except on Tuesdays. So the next one is essentialize. Now, if I'm trying to think how long ago, it was probably, I think Essentialism was one of the first books that we did, but there's a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. She references it in her book, where we learn how to really get clear on what the essentials are. And when we're clear on what the essentials are, we're also clear on what the non-essentials are. And she says, as soon as we know what our non-essentials are, we can remove them. And it's removing a lot of excess noise in our schedule, in our family, in our home, and in our mind. And what she talks about when we essentialize things is that we are adding things to our life by subtracting things. And I really got clear on what this looked like within my own home. As I went through Essentialism, I've read the book, we've studied it in the book club. You can go back and listen to it. But it's getting really clear on what matters to us and then removing what's in the way of that. So for me, what I found was it mattered to me that I was growing my business. It mattered to me that I was connecting with my children and with my husband. What was in the way of that was our excess amount of toys, because it was creating such a problem within our home. So I got really clear on how much time do I have to clean. Now that's the amount of toys I get to keep in my home. That's like what we clean up. Now we're getting to the point now where, it's like a regular rhythm that we go through and purge some of those things. We're getting to that right now because I've slowed down a lot while I've been pregnant and I'm not able to keep up with it. And now we're going to have a new baby soon. And so we're getting to that point where we need to essentialize, really go through some of those things. But we get to keep a lot of toys, like the essential toys, because that's what matters to us are certain toys, not all the toys. Okay. And so that's where he talks about like, get really clear on what matters and what's essential to you, and then start removing the obstacles that are in the way. Okay. So the next one, I told you we're going to go through all of these. Again, they may or may not resonate with you. Find some that do and work on those only for the time. So the next one is go in the right order. Okay, so go in the right order. She says, actually, maybe I just read this. So she said, remember what matters, calm the crazy, and trust yourself. Now, most of us can get pretty clear on what matters. Now, calming the crazy is a different experience for many of us. So when we are working on calming the crazy, we are giving ourselves that permission that like that energy just is not useful. Our brain will tell us it's useful. We just have to give ourselves permission to release the crazy. And then to move into full trust in what we view is the next right step that we're going to take. That's hard to do, and it takes a lot of practice. And I would really give you the challenge to let go of the shoulds or let go of the way you think you should do something and tap into the connection you have with God and with yourself and move forward on that. So the next one is to schedule rest. And we're going to go through these last couple really quick. Schedule a rest. And the last one is be kind to yourself. And I feel like these kind of go hand in hand. She said she noticed that she had regular patterns where her body would go into shutdown. It's exactly what I experienced. And I still do. And what I found was that I could either treat the symptoms or get down to the root of the problem, which is what she talks about. And so when we're really looking at self-care, when we're really practicing self-love and being kind to ourselves, what we're doing is we're creating like an energy positive towards our day. We might still have a full day. I always have full days. Like there is a lot that we still do as a family, but yet it doesn't have the same crazy, draining, exhausted type feel to it because I schedule a lot of rest in. And I'm making sure that I'm caring for my body, not just by sleeping, but by doing things that fuel my soul and really wake me up, where I really am using my natural gifts and talents. And then through that whole process is no matter what, I am always compassionate to myself first and foremost. I was coaching a client on this earlier where she was talking about how she gets really frustrated that her kids don't listen to her. And she's really like working hard on not yelling at them and getting really frustrated. But at the same time, she hasn't yet built how to be compassionate to herself. And so she's kind of stuck in this vicious cycle. So we had this conversation that the more you listen to yourself and what you're feeling, the more you are prioritizing your rest and what you are feeling, and the more you're kinder to yourself, the more you start shifting and the more in the different ways that you start communicating and existing in the world, all of that starts to happen. That is the lazy genius way. So I want you to really just stay with that. There was one other thing that I was going to read. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, so she talks about, being kind to yourself, how much we use this ideal or this potential that we want to achieve as the stick at which we're constantly beating ourselves with. She says that you keep your future ideal version of yourself as the carrot, and it leaves you discontent with who you are right now. I believe deep in my bones that living by these lazy genius principles, even the practical ones, will exercise the muscle of seeing yourself with kinder eyes as you rest, reflect, and walk a path toward a deeper, truer version of who you already are and what matters to you. And so that's where I really wanted to end for today, is that as you apply these principles, what you are doing is you are inviting rest, reflection, and you're walking that path to a deeper, truer version of yourself. And I think that's such a beautiful way as we move forward for every single one of us, is that when we apply these things, when we really let go of what doesn't matter to us, when we really start focusing on what does matter, then we can really start honing in on the systems and the processes and the decisions and the questions and really living a creative, beautiful life. This is what will lay the foundation for you to answer the purpose, whatever that purpose is that God's calling you. So typically I leave a couple minutes for questions, but we're not able to do that today. I have an interview I'm doing for somebody else's podcast. And so I'll tell you more about that this month, but I don't have it pulled up right in front of me, but go to the calendar invite. That's where it has all the information for you for our book for next month. And I hope you enjoyed The Lazy Genius Way. I will be uploading this to the YouTube channel. You can find that at Laura Johnson Coaching, or you'll find the audio on the Mom on Purpose podcast within the next week or so. All right. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all next month. Thanks for joining.